Hey everybody, it's Charlie from So Into Bourbon. Glenn and I are here at the Frazier History Museum. We're going to go in and meet with Stephen Yates. He's going to walk us through some of the awesome exhibits and show you why this is the official start of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. Let's check it out.
Okay, Glenn here with So Into Bourbon. We are at the Frazier History Museum today in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm with Stephen Yates.
Hey Glenn, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Appreciate you all coming by.
Charlie's behind the camera. Stephen, why don't you just kind of tell everybody what your role here is at the Frazier
I am the
Museum.
group sales manager here at the Frazier Museum, multiple hats. We are the official starting point of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, but we're also a Kentucky History Museum. We tell the story, the macro story of bourbon, water, soil, history, and then we direct people to go out towards their favorite distilleries, of which there are 10 within 2 miles of the Frazier here in downtown Louisville.
Awesome. So we are definitely going to get to the bourbon aspect of the museum, but while we're standing here on the bottom floor, maybe if you want to tell us just a little bit about what people can expect to find.
I would love to. You are standing here in the Cool Kentucky exhibit, which is a permanent exhibit that showcases product, people, and things that make Kentucky cool. For instance, the first thing you notice is this beautiful red Corvette that's on loan from the Corvette Factory and Museum in Bowling Green, Kentucky. That is to showcase and highlight to people the only place in the world that Corvettes are made is at the factory in Bowling Green, about an hour and 45 minutes south of Louisville here. So also we have a boat in the back that Tori Murden became the first woman to row solo across the Atlantic Ocean in the American Pearl. We tell the story of that great trek and that great trip on a daily basis. Little small things like disco balls. 90% of the world's disco balls are made by a company here in town called the Omega Corporation. Famous Kentucky artists and singers and actors, all that. And then the last thing I'll highlight down here is our 120 counties. It is a touchscreen exhibit that has a song that has been written by a person that resides in that county, a famous person, and famous being a relative term, in that county. And it's a way for people who are out in the state to kind of bridge that urban-rural gap to let people know what's here in Kentucky and have them another reason to come visit the Frazier.
Awesome.
We shall adjourn to the third floor and talk all things bourbon.
Let's do it.
Indeed. The Frazier History Museum was originally the Frazier Historical Arms Museum. Our founder, Owsley Brown Frazier, founded it in 2004, and roughly half of the exhibit was on loan from the Royal Armoury in London for a 10-year period. And when 2014 rolled around, those folks wanted their stuff back. So he did not have enough weapons to keep it as an exclusive arms museum. So what they did at that point, they transitioned into a Kentucky History Museum. And so at that point in time, our big break came in the fall of 2018 when we were dubbed the official start of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail by the Kentucky Distillers Association. So at that point in time, well, let me take a step back. The Bourbon Trail is an unofficial type of trail. People go where they want, the distilleries they like, and there's really no official way to go about it. Where you're going to be staying, who's your favorite distillery. But they kept getting all these questions about, is there an official place to start? I call it the yellow brick road syndrome. Some people like to start at the beginning and follow a path. Well, so all the distillers that are part of the association got together and they're like, we want to do this. But they couldn't put it at one of the distilleries because it would give that place a competitive advantage. This place, the Frazier, being founded by Mr. Frazier, his grandfather was a gentleman by the name of George Garvin Brown, who founded Brown-Forman Corporation, which makes Woodford Reserve and Old Forester, and they own a little company in Lynchburg, Tennessee called Jack Daniels. Just a small little mom and pop operation, right? So that gave credibility to the whiskey industry. And then at that point in time, there were only 6 distilleries that were within a couple miles of the Frazier, but still it gave a great place for people coming into town for conventions or vacations that were here for a few days, but they couldn't get to Bardstown, they couldn't get to Lexington. So it gave them a place to kind of learn about the macro component of bourbon, the soil, the water, all that, and then be able to walk or have a short drive to these other 6 distilleries. So that's why this opened in the fall of 2018, and it has really expanded since then. Across the street, we now have Bardstown Bourbon and Buzzard's Roost, and Monk's Road just opened up, and Heaven's Door, Bob Dylan's distillery has just recently opened up. So truly a whiskey boom here on Main Street. And what we like people to do is to come here and kind of get an overview of the industry and then go to their favorite distillery to get that specific story and to buy those products. We go from macro to micro, and that's kind of the approach that we take.
Absolutely, and I think it's a perfect place to start. It's a great exhibit. It's kind of like I would call it the hub, and then you have the spokes.
That's a great, that's what we hope,
Yeah.
and that's what a lot of people do, because prior to COVID, you had to do a tour to get a tasting, right? Well, then after COVID, the industry had to revamp a little bit because they didn't have enough people to handle all the tours. So all these places in downtown Louisville have bars. So you can come in, you can do a flight, you can get a cocktail, learn about the history of that distillery and the products without necessarily having to do a tour. And that's been a boom for customers that are bourbon fans because they don't have to spend as much time and as much money at every place. They can pick and choose which location, which brands are more important to them.
Sure, awesome.
Well, Glenn, this is one of my favorite spots in the museum. Some people call Walt Disney the happiest place on earth. This is the happiest place on earth for bourbon-loving adults.
I would agree.
Because this is our bottle haul, and the whole idea behind this, the goal is to have every bottle of bourbon or rye whiskey currently being produced in Kentucky. Now, we'll never get them all because there's always some new expression coming out, new distilleries being that are popping up. But what we have is approximately, last count, like 382 bottles in here. And they're all real bottles that have been donated by the various distilleries. Some highlights, here's the Heaven's Door, the Bob Dylan bottles.
Yeah, those are nice.
This is Dark Arts, which is a good buddy of mine, Macaulay Minton, who used to be the single barrel coordinator at Wilderness Trail. Lawrenceburg Bourbon has got they're a new distillery, Limestone Branch Farm. So there's small ones, big ones, about 15 expressions of Michter's. We have a thing called What's Your Bourbon Number? The idea is you go through and you count up how many of these you've had a taste of. You come up with a number. We have this placard over here. You put that number on the placard and it says my bourbon number is, and it makes for a nice photo op.
Charlie, we'll have to do that before we leave. I'm scared to see what my number's going to be.
And then as we do this is a cool little thing too, gentlemen. This goes into our speakeasy, which is where I do my tastings for groups, and also we have parties and events, et cetera, in here.
Okay.
Private. It's a Prohibition event space. We have Mr. Capone back here in the corner. This is a fun place. When I have groups in, we'll go through the exhibit and we'll end up in here and we'll taste. So.
Is this where you shoot your?
No, I actually shoot mine in the order of the written. We will go in there next.
Okay.
This is where I do my group tastings.
Gotcha.
And then when I teach for our class, we're down on the second floor. I'll show you that if they're not in there doing anything. But follow me, and we'll go to the order of the writ. And that's where I do my Sipping with Stephen show. This is another when the exhibit was built. This is another thing that they did to be able to have private parties, and this is where I film my YouTube show, Sipping with Stephen. A little more formalized than the speakeasy, just kind of a different vibe.
Right.
And very, very popular. A lot of times when people have big events, they'll have like a full bar over here and then a bourbon tasting in the speakeasy. Okay. And it makes for a really nice, atmosphere.
Bar. And you mentioned Sipping with Stephen. If you haven't seen Sipping with Stephen, is that just on YouTube or is it a podcast as well?
No, it's just on YouTube. We do it once a month, and typically what happens is I have one of our distillery partners or someone in the industry comes in and they do a little commercial, about 6 minutes or so, about what's going on at their place. And then typically we will make a cocktail or review one of their expressions. And it's about a 12-minute thing that we try to support all of our distillery sponsors or cooperages. Sometimes it'll be a restaurant that's local, whatever it may be, that is all part of the bourbon experience when people come in.
Tough job, isn't it?
It is a tough job. This is a covered bridge that represents things that you would see in Eastern Kentucky, and it is more of a mood setter. There's about 20 different images that rotate through here. Like that's Three Chimney Farms up around Lexington. They show the Red River Gorge. They show Keeneland Racetrack. Just things throughout Kentucky that are very unique to the landscape. This is looking out the visitor center at Wild Turkey in Lawrenceburg over the Kentucky River. So that's one of only 2 images that actually relate to the bourbon industry.
Gotcha.
Most of it just shows people how beautiful Kentucky is from a geographic standpoint and kind of sets the mood of the exhibit.
I've yet to visit Wild Turkey. That makes me really
They've reopened and it's fantastic. In here we talk about the water. There's a quick minute video from the Louisville Water Company, one of our sponsors of the exhibit. And that's one of the things we want to talk about is how before there were water companies, the reason Kentucky was so good on making whiskey was we had this natural filter. The limestone took the iron and the other impurities out of the water. So before you had a water company that did that, it made the potable water better, but also the water for making bourbon. It didn't have that bitter and caustic flavor you would have had if the iron and other stuff was still in it. Now, I understand Southern Indiana has got fabulous water too, so I would be remiss if I didn't say that.
Absolutely. They're making some good whiskey over there.
Yeah, they are. We talk about transportation, the flatboats and the paddle wheelers and the water, not just as a source of an ingredient, but as a mode of transportation that would get the stuff up. Kentucky has over 2,000 miles of navigable waterways. They all head up to the Ohio River. And in the old days, when these flatboats would come down from Pittsburgh, the only impediment on the Ohio River from Pittsburgh to where it hits the Mississippi is the falls of the Ohio out here. And that was why Louisville became a settlement and eventually a city and a town, because it was a logistics center.
Sure.
If you came down at the wrong time of the year, you were stuck here till the water level raised back up, because it was like a 100-foot drop. Mm-hmm. So you had to stay. And so people needed, they needed whiskey. Kentucky was the westernmost outpost, and life on the wilderness was tough, or people headed further west, or product going down to New Orleans, and eventually across the Atlantic back to the European market. So that all kind of came together. And then, we talk about how the Scotch and the Irish settled here, and they wanted to bring the kind of whiskey, or make the kind of whiskey they made in the homeland, but the weather was different, the soil was different, they had to adapt. And what grew really good here was corn, and you could only eat so much corn, you could only feed so much to your livestock. They had to find a way to make an asset out of that corn. Right. So they started making corn whiskey. And as Paul Harvey said, the rest of the story kind of came about from there. So that's a Filson map, and we talk about how all the different water tributaries flow up to the Ohio. And the fact that, as I mentioned, that we have over 2,000 miles of navigable waterways. Only Alaska has more in the United States.
Really?
So,
I did not know that.
Yeah, I'm the Cliff Clavin of bourbon. What can I say? This is called a mesonet, and it's a solar-powered weather gathering device, basically like a modern-day farmer's almanac. And the reason we have it, that panel there's a blue streak that goes across it. This unit was actually hit by lightning.
Oh.
It rendered it inoperable. The folks from Western Kentucky University, who do all the weather analysis for the farmers, called us and said, would you like to have an example of technology that farmers use to be more efficient? We said yes. They sent us this, and that's why this is here. I never knew what a mesonet was prior to that. Now, occasionally on local news, when they're doing the weather, like if there's a tornado or severe weather coming in, you'll get pictures from a mesonet. So I kind of know what it is now.
And you don't have bourbon without farmers, right?
No, and that's what goes into the farm production. It's very interesting. The bourbon renaissance kind of took off as Kentucky was getting out of the tobacco industry. And so the farmers took that tobacco buyout, and the whole part of what they tried to do was find other ways to allow them to stay on the farm if they so chose and have a more rural lifestyle. And that's where the bourbon boom came back in, because the majority of corn used for bourbon is number 2 yellow corn. Not exclusive, but the vast majority. People could grow that to the specifications of specific distilleries, and then they had a built-in market to sell that product year after year, because prior to that, if you were raising corn in Kentucky, you were trying to get into a grocery store, you were selling at a farmer's market, or you were selling at a grain elevator for little or no profit. So this allowed people to do that. The 40, in fact, is an example, Glenn. The 46 distilleries on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail in 2022 bought 20 million bushels of corn, and 75% of that came from Kentucky growers. And corn production in the counties where the large production distilleries are located and the counties that are adjacent has tripled in the last 10 years.
You know, that's interesting. I never put those two timelines together.
Yeah.
The rise of the bourbon industry
And the decline of
downfall
tobacco.
Yeah, that's
it really,
very interesting.
it's been timely, it's been beyond fortunate. But when you look at, well, we do grow wheat and rye in Kentucky too, but to be honest, Jim Beam could buy all the local wheat and rye themselves. So most of that has to come from other states where it's a little cooler atmosphere, the Dakotas, Michigan, Wisconsin, even southern Canada, they brings in and then they disperse off. But yeah, agriculture is a huge part. When you factor in the agriculture, tourism, and the production of the spirit, bourbon is, I believe, the number two industry in Kentucky now, right behind the automotive parts and the automotive industry and the automotive parts industry. So we also talk about horse racing. We won't go into too much detail, but again, back to the limestone water, Triple Crown winners, and how bourbon, the first bourbon kind of came. First Derby was in 1875, and how they were serving it neat, because this is when carbonated beverages were just starting to come about, and there weren't any mixers, and most horse racing was done in the summertime. And a lot of ladies didn't want to drink 90, 100 proof bourbon in the dead of summer, and they'd get these little taps on their husbands would get these taps on the shoulder saying, it's time to go. Well, the track realized real quick that the more people drank, the bolder their bets were and the more the money they made. So they had to come up with a way to keep the ladies happy so that they will want to stay. And they tried all kinds of different fruits, all kinds of different stuff. But they realized real quick that with sugar and water, they had a simple syrup. That's when they tried the different fruits. And in April and May, mint is in season in Kentucky. Somebody had the brilliant idea of putting mint, sugar, and bourbon together. The mint julep was born. The first Derby was run in 1875. That timeline matches up. And again, from there, now they sell how many thousands of those every year at the Derby and at Churchill Downs and other tracks nonstop. So we go into a whole lot more detail about that as well.
And the mint julep gets a lot of hate. I personally love mint juleps.
If you
they're made correctly.
Yeah, when you find somebody that knows how to make it, and I'm a big believer of infusing your simple syrup with mint so you don't have to have all that greenery in your drink that can get stuck in your mouth. We do a mint julep class here in April and May. I make the simple syrup. It's infused with mint. And I hate to say it myself, but it is spectacular. So we can go into detail more about that.
May have to come check that out.
Yeah, please. Well, this is an example of a Civil War production still from the James E. Pepper Distillery in Versailles, which is where Woodford Reserve is located today. During the Civil War, anything made of metal would have been confiscated and melted down and turned into cannonballs or bullets for one side or the other. And Kentucky was schizophrenic during the Civil War, had a star on both flags, said 100,000 to the Union Army, 40,000 to the Confederacy. So the people who worked there did not want their beloved still being made into munitions for either side, so they buried it. It stayed buried until the early 1990s when they broke ground at Woodford Reserve. They found it, they dug it up, it was sitting outside the distillery as a decorative piece. We got a similar phone call like we did with the mezzanette. They said, would you like to have an example of a production still? And we said, sure. And then they also sent this little piece, which is a 1 ear at a time hand corn desheller. So you could imagine, that's why this was a state-of-the-art still, because you could imagine how long and how many people it would have had to take to hand crank out enough corn to make a batch of mash.
Somebody had a really developed right arm.
Yeah, I guess that's a right-handed one there, or you could be left and do the other side.
Mounted, yeah.
So this is kind of a cool thing in that I always tell people, Kentucky Peerless is next door. They are considered a craft distillery. Their still is like 30 to 35 times bigger than this and considered relatively on the smaller side. So it's all perspective.
Absolutely.
We talk about the barrel. We have an example of a barrel over here. I go into detail about the Devil's Cut and the Angel's Share, the charring process. I don't want to give away all the info because we want people to come visit us, But it's really, really cool. It's hands-on. Kids are here if you want to make a barrel, see how that works. So that all kind of sets you up as we walk into our gracious room, which has some porcelain decanters here on the side, which are really cool, that are from the 60s and 70s when bourbon was really kind of in the dumps. And most of it got sold between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And now the only time you'll find these kind of decanters is like at an estate sale, or somebody passes away and somebody goes through it. And these decanters empty have sold anywhere from like $80 to $300 a piece, depending on which ones they are. And if you find one that has liquid in it, you are really, really fortunate.
Charlie and I are big fans of old dusty decanters. We've done several episodes. We did a Old Crow Chessman from 1968 that we drank.
Oh my goodness.
We've done a couple of the old Jim Beam decanters, which those are pretty easy to come by. Old Granddad 114 decanter from 1982.
I love 114. Vastly underrated product.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Well, the one decanter we have in here, gentlemen, that is not porcelain, you see that rifle down there over that mantle, that is actually a Daviess County 78 whiskey decanter with the cork and the stock of the rifle.
Oh wow.
It came in with juice in it. I was fortunate enough to get to try it, and it was spectacular.
I gotta see this.
Yeah, by all means. It's on loan, but that's the only decanter I've ever seen firsthand that wasn't porcelain. You know, when weapons come to a museum, there's a certain protocol you got to do to check them in. And upon knowing it, you can tell it's not a real weapon.
Right.
But when it came in from a distance, our folks like, oh, okay, we got to go through A, B, C, and D. But there was a sloshing noise that came. And so then we realized, then they looked at the write-up, it was on loan and that it was a decanter. We didn't realize it had liquid in it at the time.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Now, this right here, this is our touchscreen table that is basically our bourbon repository. Glenn, you touch anything that's floating around and it'll bring up information about that. People go out on the trail, like here's Jim Beam Bonded. Everything about that distillery is over here. And it's meant so that people can come and do a little research and learn a little bit more about where they're going to go visit so they can get a little deeper in their tours and in their questions with the people at those various distilleries. All the distilleries out on the trail have the opportunity to put information in here, just like they do to put bottles in the bottle hall. And I will get around to have all of them on Sipping with Stephen as well. So this is kind of cool. The same company that did the bridge did this. And it's meant to look like bourbon in the background. Okay. You can share stuff. It's just a very cool bit of technology that helps people navigate the bourbon trail.
That is. That's really cool.
And then this is our dusty bottle hall in here. There's a great poster board, a picture of Larry Hagman. Before he was J.R. Ewing, he was Major Nelson on I Dream of Jeannie. And in his hand is a picture of Jeannie's bottle, which was a James Beam whiskey decanter that was bought. They bought 10 of them for $5.99. And when the show was canceled, was sold at auction for $100,000. So that's kind of cool. We actually have a bottle over here from the Beal and Steel Drug Company in Steubenville, Ohio, that has a prescription on the label that says, take a tablespoon when feeling weak, and it's dated August of 1930. All kinds of, you'll see all these little tax strips on here, which were the way to validate that the federal government had got their taste. If the ATF agent saw you walking around with a bottle and it didn't have the tax strip on it, they would want to know where you got your medicine from. Because you could go to the doctor every 2 months and get a pint of whiskey for medicinal purposes. And there were 6 distilleries that got to keep selling. Brown-Forman was one of them. And that's why these bottles are all smaller, because there were no liquor stores during Prohibition. They had to fit on the shelf behind the pharmacist.
Sure.
And they also had to fit in a lady's purse or down a man's boot. So we have a whole bunch of those.
Oh, I would love to taste some of those.
They're all real, yes, indeed, no doubt. They're all real product. A lot of them courtesy of our chairman of the board, Mac Brown. Thank you, Mac. Appreciate all you do for us. Old Granddad was they were originally from the American Medicinal Spirits Company. That was another one of those 6 companies. And on the label it says, unexcelled for medicinal purposes. That's actually, do you know who that is on that label on Old Granddad, Glenn?
Tell him, Charlie. Charlie will tell
does. You. Exactly right. only person who represents 2 different brands in the bourbon industry. Old Granddad is still made to this day at Jim Beam. Basil Hayden is one of the Jim Beam small batch expressions.
Old Mork, that's one I've never seen.
I know,
before.
where's old Mindy, right?
Exactly.
But it's funny, you look at this, in most marketing campaigns, it's all about new and improved, but the operative word most of these bourbon bottles is old.
Well, and honestly, I know a lot of people are like me. One of the things that I love about bourbon is the history.
Oh, the history and the lore, the stories and the history. Well, and the funny thing about older bourbon, people always ask, why is it so expensive? Because they're paying taxes on it every year, but they're losing a certain percent to evaporation. So if you have the demand up here and the supply down here, your cost is going to be expensive. Bourbon is the ultimate supply and demand commodity. You know, so it is just very interesting to me in that regard, because people will say, so like Pappy Van Winkle or brands that are like 20, 23 years old, are they inherently better? That's up to your individual palate. They're inherently more expensive because there's less of it when you get to time to put it in the bottle, and they've been paying taxes on it for a full amount every one of those years. So, so that's a little overview of the Spirit of Kentucky Bourbon exhibit. We go into more detail when people come through, answer questions, or sometimes people have a point of interest that's not like the outline that I just gave you, and I'm always happy to go into as much detail as people would like. But this is our Spirit of Kentucky Bourbon exhibit, and as you called it earlier, kind of the jumping off point of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail.
Absolutely. And if you're watching this, I'm glad you're watching it. Great information. I hope it kind of puts a little bug in your ear if you come to town and you plan on visiting some distilleries and doing some bourbon tourism. Definitely make sure you stop here at the Frazier Museum. Yeah,
we would love to have any and all people come by and check it out. It is a whole bunch of information, and if people with 8 or more, they can contact me, and we can do a group that will end up in the speakeasy doing a tasting, or we can just do the history part. If they come smaller than that, we do tastings that rotate around. Sometimes they're up here, other places in the museum. So always happy to accommodate guests, however they, whatever their points of interest are.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
It is my pleasure, my friend.
Okay, so that was fun, right?
That was awesome.
To hang out at the Frazier Historical Museum all day long, and that was, well, maybe not all day, but a couple hours anyway.
Felt like all day to Stephen. So thank you to Stephen and the nice people at the Frazier History Museum. There's a reason it's the start of the Bourbon Trail. It's a great place to start. It kind of gets you going. You check all the boxes. You learn a little bit about the process. It tells you where to go, what to do, the history, the background, why bourbon exists in Kentucky, and the effect that it has on our economy.
Absolutely. It's a great place. And aside just from the bourbon exhibit, there's tons of other really cool stuff to look at.
Tons of stuff.
Highly recommend it. And, Charlie.
Yes?
A little birdie told me that we may be doing maybe a little bit more content there at the Frazier Museum. You want to tell them about that?
We're very cultured, and we're going to interview an author, specifically Mark Mead, author of The Bourbon Journey, the Kentucky Travel Guide. And Mark is going to join us. We're working on dates now, and we're going to interview him about his wonderful book. And this book is great. If you have occasion, I'm sure it's on, do we know, is it on Amazon?
You know what? I don't know. Mark was kind enough to send us this copy.
It's a beautiful book. We have been perusing it, reading it. It's awesome. It's a great gift. Makes a great gift, or buy it for yourself if you're planning on coming to Kentucky. But we're going to sit down, talk to him, and we're going to do that at the Frazier.
Absolutely. So be looking for that. Charlie, why don't you tell them what to do?
Well, you got to follow us on YouTube so you get more hard-hitting history content like this.
Absolutely. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram, So in the Bourbon, Whiskey Realtor on TikTok, and don't forget, keep those wallets loose.
And your bungholes tight. Good night, everybody.
Peace out.
History.
If I do that during the episode, it's not my fault.
It will be your fault. Okay, ready?
That's just the over. Go. Okay, so that was kind of fun, wasn't it?
It wasn't kind of fun.
Yeah.
That was a blast.
Thanks to Stephen Yates for let's try that.
You want to do the clap thing now?
No, we don't need to do a clap. All right, 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1.
All right, ready? 3, 2.
White boy clap.
I'm done. Everybody clapping on the 1 and the 3. All right, here we go. And hold on. History. Go.